Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of property experts, and we have a real technical duo with us today. And first of all we have Ben Mackie, founder of the Party Wall Collective Limited. Welcome. Dave Forde, Chartered Construction Manager and Consultant. Welcome back to you.
Thank you.
Now it's Ben's first show, so we have to go easy on him today, and we'll try and make it all flow. Okay, Dave, I'm going to start with you. When employing a project manager, what sort of qualifications should I look for?
Okay, so project manager, PM. Now this is one of the things I see in the property developing industry that is, how can I put it, as such wide parameters. Look, what is a project? You know, is it a one-bedroom flat where you're painting the walls and having new carpets, or is it building 1,000 new build houses? Do you know what I mean? I see a lot of people, an awful lot of people, marketing their services as PMs, and really they're not. They're just people who've overseen small, relatively easy pieces of work where not a lot could go wrong. When you talk about qualifications now, I've met people who've got degrees and master's degrees in construction project management. I've also met very good project managers who've got none of those qualifications. When it comes down to it, any decent project manager needs to know 6 things about a project, and that is the scope, the schedule, quality, risk, finance, and resources. Okay, any decent project manager who can't talk to you about those 6 things is not a project manager, in my opinion. When you start getting into bigger projects, let's say, let's take a 6-story block of flats or something, or 50 new build houses. Now you would expect someone like that to understand some advanced project management techniques such as PERT, which is project evaluation review techniques, critical path analysis. But if you're just doing an HMO, they don't need to know things like that. Someone asked me once what sort of professional bodies they should belong to. Well, the most popular one is the Association for Project Management. But again, I've met fantastic project managers who are not part of that.
Dave, is there a financial level at which one would say, I must have a project manager, or does it relate purely to finance, or is it just totally on complexity of project?
It's totally on the complexity, I would say, and also you need to ask yourself, do you actually want a project manager or a site manager? Because if you're engaging a main contractor, then they're responsible for what goes on out on site, deliveries, etc. You don't need a site manager there. Really, you just need a project manager who'll come down once a week, will have an interface progress meeting with the main contractor and report back to you. A lot of people get confused, you know, they want someone who's going to be out on site, ordering gear, dealing with problems, and they're calling that a project manager.
I mean, I think one of the things I've noticed, been involved with various developments from fairly small stuff to some of these big 70-story towers, and I think the classic mistake any developer or any principal makes is they fail to coordinate the various trades, and you find it's time for fitting all the light switches and the wiring's not done, or that sort of thing, and that's a huge part of project management, isn't it?
Yeah, so for the smaller developer, in that scenario, you would probably be acting yourself as the main contractor, i.e. you're going to find a project and you say, I'll get separate trades in. Now it's down to you to coordinate the schedule of works, the critical path, and ordering deliveries, materials. If things go wrong, if people don't turn up, if work takes longer than you expected, you've got to rejig everything. That is project management, But like I say, if you've got a main builder there, he'll be charging you a project management fee anyway. So why do you want to employ a project manager as well? Are you going to get your money's worth? That's what I'm saying.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for that. So Ben, your first question. And look, before I ask this question, I should say, you're a party wall expert, consultant, and I'd have a bet with you that the majority of our viewers are not too sure what a party wall is. So
I didn't know about it before I became a party wall surveyor. So it's really, I would say, an overlooked but important piece of legislation.
Of course, yeah. So the first question is, how do I determine if a wall is a party wall or not?
I would say very simply, because it does get really complicated, unfortunately, but very simply, it's a wall with two interested parties or more. So typically, the most obvious example is terraced house or semi-detached house. It's simply the wall that divides the houses. What I would say though is that the party wall goes a lot further than that. And it does. There's two types of party walls, like a type A party wall and a type B party wall. So it gets more complicated.
Do explain.
Shall I explain?
Yes.
Ordinarily, I suppose you'd have diagrams that would help you to explain what the walls are. A type A party wall is, say, the standard wall that might separate two terraced houses, for example. Your living room wall is a party wall if it, is shared with a neighbour on the other side of their living room. So quite simply, if you want to alter that wall or make any cuttings into it, you need to notify that neighbour. There's a type B party wall, which is where maybe you're an end of terrace house, then someone comes along and then builds onto your wall. So the boundary, the original boundary goes down the face of the wall. So it doesn't go through the midpoint, which is the normal.
A little bit like a demise for an apartment where your responsibility finishes at the plasterboard finish. A little bit like that. Yeah.
I would say yeah. On the flip side, yes, that could be it. But it changes in the sense that the obligations will still be exactly the same. A shared wall now comes under the Party Wall Act. But to be very clear as well, it's called the Party Wall Etc. Act. And that makes it a lot more difficult now because you're bringing into play building at the boundary, excavation as well within 3 meters of some foundations next door, and also the party wall that allows you to interfere with a wall wholly on someone else's land. So you might think, well, that's crazy, that's someone else's wall, but you can cut projections from that wall, you can insert flashing into the wall. So it's actually quite an intrusive piece of legislation that goes far beyond what a lot of people would expect, which is just a standard party wall, hence your question.
That etc. sounds quite a wide-ranging.
It's absolutely crazy how much the Party Wall Act does encompass. It really is a lot. So what a party wall is, just very simply, it's just, for most people, it's that shared wall. And that includes, by the way, garden walls as well. That's known as, confusingly, a party fence wall when it's got nothing to do with fences. But, so you can have a shared boundary wall, it's a shared asset, you can turn that into a side of an extension, you can demolish it, rebuild it, but it's a shared asset to which you have to serve a notice on your neighbour. Oh, and sorry, there's one more.
Go on, yeah.
Structures, party structures, that also comes into it. So, if you're living in some flats and you alter the ceiling or the floor or something, there's also party structures. So that's why it becomes a lot more
so it would apply to
involved.
The floor dividing the two.
Yeah, it certainly can do, yeah. So there's so much to work with there.
So I see Dave looking at you, and do you come across this much, David?
Well, again, if you're engaging a project manager, are you going to make one of their duties responsibility for undertaking party wall documentation? This is something that people don't take into account.
And presumably it could add a significant cost if there's an argument.
Just recently, I put a post on LinkedIn, and it was to do with £2,000 worth of damage, with the surveyor charging £28,000. So when we say it can add significant cost, it's just, it can be horrific in worst case scenarios.
Be warned. Okay, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Ben and Dave more of your questions. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm with Ben Mackie and Dave Forde. Welcome back, guys. Dave, there's an interesting one for you. What are the most common mistakes a do-it-yourself developer makes?
I've only got 5 minutes.
Yeah, you're going to say start the development.
All right. The most common, right, first of all, the very first one is not understanding their obligations under the CDM regulations 2015.
What is CDM?
They cover the legal responsibilities for health and safety on a construction site.
Right.
Developer thinks I'm just doing a little refurb, but it's nothing. No. You are running a fully fledged construction site. If you get it wrong, there can be up to 2 years in prison. You know, please, before you even think of starting, go and find out what you need to do. Secondly, failing to understand the scope of the project. Now that could be the scope of all the works included, or sometimes they do understand everything needs to be done, but they forget what goes with it. It's not just labour and materials, there's a lot of other associated costs that go with it. And failing to accurately understand what a project's going to cost. Those two are linked. You know, if you don't understand what's involved, you're not going to understand what it costs. But getting unrealistic cost projections, not doing proper research, you know. And then I would say the next really common mistake people make is not using the correct contract. There are specific contracts for construction projects, refurbishments, HMOs. They're called JCT contracts. A lot of people do it with a handshake with a builder, or they just sign up to the builder's payment terms. It's like cost of projects, 100 grand, 8 months, 20 grand up front, 10 grand on the first of them. It's just the builder's payment terms you're signing up to. It's not contract. So that's one. And the last one I see very, very common is not getting the correct builders. Now that's, how can I put it, not understanding the value of paying for good builders. A lot of people buy on price, not quality, you know. Or they'll have their mates round, or they'll have their daughter's boyfriend's mate he plays football with, who's not really a plasterer. Like he does a bit of rendering, but he only wants one a day, so we won't pay a plasterer $250 a day. We'll have him. It all goes wrong. That's just some of the things I see, right?
Okay. But actually, Dave, I'm just thinking about it. I mean, say you're a small developer, you're perhaps looking at a job, you're trying to price it, your banker pushing you to be firm on your prices and know where you're going. But as a project manager, presumably you're quite well insured for anything that goes wrong under your direction. And actually that can be quite a saving for the developer himself, because he doesn't have to duplicate that insurance probably.
Well, yeah, I've got professional indemnity insurance for all pre-construction activities. So if I say to you it's going to cost X amount and we need this, then it all goes wrong and I cause you financial loss, you can claim on my insurance. But getting back to the costing bit, people don't, you need to go and pay someone to do it. That's either a chartered construction manager or a chartered surveyor who will give you an accurate price. You know, don't try to skimp on these essential things.
Yeah, and I also think with builders, it's always good to go and see what they've actually done before, isn't it? And I think I would tend to take my project manager along with me and say, let's have a look at what they've done, shall we?
Well, yeah, but any builder who allows you to go and see his previous work is only going to show you the good jobs. It's like,
I suppose
it's
so.
like on their website, they're only going to show you their best stuff.
Dave, you're not becoming a cynic, are you?
Mate, no, mate, no. I've just been around, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well done. Anything to add to that, Ben?
No, I think, like, you know, I'm learning as well actually off of this, so it's like really good for me to hear all of that. So thank you.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, look, Ben, we'll ask your question now. Now, this follows on from your first question of how do I determine if a party wall is a party wall, is how can I determine if actually my project needs a party wall agreement or notice? Because that in itself is quite a complicated process, isn't it?
I would say you need to speak to a sharp surveyor who isn't just going to take you for a ride with all the cash. So what I mean by that is, you've spoken about, say, house building, right? And the reality is that actually quite large projects don't need a huge amount of involvement from a party wall surveyor, right? And a good surveyor might say, right, okay, look, in terms of does the party wall act apply, right? Let's say you've got this large project and you're building up to a boundary, you might have to notify, say 100 different adjoining owners, because it's a large project and you're building up to the boundary. But we could also say, well, look, what happens if, the houses are set in a little bit, or we change fractionally, if you're not building up to the boundary, you could say build 1 centimetre from the boundary and all of a sudden you don't have to serve 100 notices. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is a good surveyor giving the best advice will tell you when the act will be invoked, but at the same time how to potentially bypass it. You'd have to weigh it up though. Do I need access, onto the neighbour's land? Because it works the other way. Sometimes a build will be like set back from the boundary by, say half a metre for whatever reason, or even less, but you needed access onto the neighbour's land, right? So to be smart, a surveyor might say, well, look, you don't need to serve a notice, but how are you going to do this build? Maybe if you do shift it up to the boundary, we force access. So you're using the act to your advantage. So a good surveyor will tell you when is the party wall act invoked, and will sort of tell you that the pros and cons of using the party wall act and how to either avoid it or bring it into play so that your project works really well.
Okay, Ben, I'm interested. At what point would you get involved? Is this something that you would get involved with at the point of the architect drawing up the plans and saying to his client, "Look, here's the project I want to run"? Would it be at that point that you get involved, or would it be closer to the construction?
I would say it just depends on, there's quite a few variables in terms of what is the work that's taking place. For larger scale builds, commercial builds, for example, you might want to get involved, for the very basic drawings to start off with, to give a bit of advice so they can be tweaked, so that by the time we're serving notice, we realised who we eliminated or what we were trying to achieve. With smaller sort of residential builds, I would say as soon as you've got any drawings, just have a chat, because as soon as you put in for planning, there's what are known as ambulance chasing surveyors, who will literally write to your neighbours to try and create a dispute, and they literally make millions every year from it, right? So what I'm saying is get in there nice and early, where it's residential as well, so that you can have that chat with your neighbour and do it on your terms, instead of some sort of nasty surveyor writing to your neighbour trying to stoke a dispute.
How would you deal with the ambulance chasers, Dave?
Oh dear.
I'd
Might be
refer
physical
him to
there.
Ben.
Oh, I thought you were going to get physical there. How would you deal with them? Pay them a visit? But yeah.
Take 3 of your labourers round there.
Well, I'd rather just stay away from them sort of projects. A party wall can be headache. It really can.
Yes. Okay. And Ben, I suppose one of the questions that people ask is that, wow, this isn't something I've thought about. It's a new dimension that I've got to consider for the project. Is it an expensive game? How do you charge? Is it just on an hourly basis, on time, or is it perhaps, as architects do, a percentage of the project cost? Or
I personally tend to do fixed fees. So I like to give a sense of certainty. I'm not saying my model of charging is perfect, by the way, because I charge the same, say, in Mayfair as I would in Walthamstow, but my pricings possibly could be quite a bit higher in certain areas, to be honest, with the sort of the risk that's associated with certain builds in certain areas. So, I mean, most surveyors charge by the hour, which I personally think isn't that great, because there's lots of arguments about timesheets and stuff, and was each hour that I spent, because they charge in London, I would say, as little as 150 an hour, but sort of up to about 600 an hour. So the point is that what are you doing with those hours? I see timesheets with phone calls and stuff, like emails and stuff, where you're like, well, what are you doing? So for me, it's the end price that matters. So that's.
I think surety is very important, isn't it? Again, down to budgeting and down to your project manager to okay, I presume.
Well, that is a thing for any properly planned project. You need a project cost plan. So if, let's just say, engaging the services of a party wall surveyor, $3,000 or 10 grand, that's in my plan, my budget. But if it's by the hour, you know, it could send me over my budget. Now I've got to compromise on something else. I've got to find additional funding. So a fixed fee model would be preferable.
I personally honour a fixed fee. So what I'm saying is that if it gets more complicated and I was like, oh no, that's my problem. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it will be quite easy money and other times you're really working for it. That's the pros and cons of the fixed fee system.
But okay, well, on that very, very competent note, and very pleasing to hear that somebody acts with integrity, is always good to hear. I think honouring fees is a very important part of life, really. Thank you both very much for your contribution to the programme today. Very technical for some of our viewers, but very important nevertheless, and not something you should easily overlook, I think, when you're doing these things. So big thank you to Ben Mackie, founder of Party Wall Collective, Dave Forde, Charter Construction Manager and Consultant. Thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Property Question Time.